Great to see all of you. As I just mentioned, I think have more content than probably was needed, so we'll do the best we can here. Those who are watching the recording, give them a little warning of that. And a couple of quick reminders. I think you all know I am not a mental health professional. We are going to be talking about topics that are difficult and connected to things like stress and burnout and overwhelm and so just to remind everyone that all of these things are things that I have learned first and foremost just for myself that have really helped me and are continuing to help me, and then also have used with clients as well. So that's kind of the context here. Just a reminder too that anything people share will be held in confidence. I will edit things out of the recording so that you don't, please feel free to share whatever you would like to. All right, so I'd like to start with a question and just give you a moment to consider, and then I hope that you will be willing to share. And the question is simply, how does overwhelm show up in your body? What do you notice about your physical sensations when you're in that experience of overwhelm? And I would love it if any of you are willing to share. Yeah, thanks. So let me follow this up with a related but slightly different question. I'm curious to hear how burnout feels. And is that the same as overwhelm or is it different? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Just from your own experience, right? There's no right or wrong answer here. Just curious how people, what those words mean to you and how you experience these different states. Yeah, that's how I think of it too. I think of it as like, if it's a train going, like that's the next station, right? Overwhelmed, 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 burned out. And we're going to talk a little bit about kind of the physiology of that in a minute. Anyone else want to share any observations about this? You all are touching on, I think, in fact, I think all of sort of the key dimensions of burnout, right? At least according to some um, sort of descriptions or models. It's not quite the right word, but yeah, totally. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what that kind of those differences, like that going from overwhelm into burnout, right? And in part because we want to talk about burnout and we want to talk about what it looks like and what are the factors and how can we come back from it. And also by understanding a little bit more about this connection, the hope is that we can keep ourselves from going into full-blown burnout, right? And build resilience to bring us back to a healthy set point. So that's kind of what the space that we're going to play in today. And stop me at any point if you want to add anything or have questions on anything. So I'm going to toss I'm going to toss kind of a word out there that many of you have heard me use before. And I know it can be a little bit controversial, and I'm using it very intentionally because I think it's exactly the right word, and I'm going to describe why. So many of you were just talking about how burnout is this like new level of exhaustion, I think one of you said, right? And it's just like you lose motivation, all of this. So, that's like a state of shutdown, right? Or basically a state of collapse. And trauma, and here I'm talking about trauma in the body as a nervous system response, not trauma as an event that happened to us. It can be precipitated by one event or many events, but it's the body's response. Trauma has that same sense of being shut down or being in collapse. And it stems, or can stem at least, from failure to complete the stress cycle. So I'm going to say a little bit about that. So there are two ways, and I've heard various people talk about this. Dr. Amy, she just goes by Dr. Amy, as someone who commonly talks about these two descriptors of too much too fast or too little for too long are common trauma triggers in the body. So if we think about our lives as academics, our lives as parents for some of us, as friends, as family members, put all of that together. I, I mean, honestly, I can't think of better words to characterize and describe it than too much too fast and or too little for too long, right? I mean, to me, these are sort of the perfect descriptors of what we go through. And so this failure to complete the stress cycle, you think of it like this, right? We're in a calm state, everything's fine, something triggers our nervous system to jump into sympathetic, right? Like fight or flight. And then in an ideal world, sort of the way we want it to work is once that threat has been eliminated, we're back into our parasympathetic, ventral vagal, nice state, right? Could be dorsal, but we're in parasympathetic. What happens when it's all coming at us too fast with no break, or when we're just hanging on by a thread for too long, is we can't get back. Okay. And one of the examples that I mentioned, Dr. Amy, one of the examples that she gives that I find really powerful is for too much too fast. She says, think about if somebody's tossing us a tennis ball. Okay, like we're a little bit on alert, we're paying attention, right? Then somebody's tossing like, really, really fast, but okay, we're all right. And then suddenly it's like 100 tennis balls in 2 seconds. What are we going to do? Give up. Yeah, exactly. We're going to freeze, we're going to shut down, we're going to collapse, right? Because at some point it's like, and one of you was sharing this, like this idea of stress can help us kind of get going, right? Stress can be a motivator, raises our heart rate, we've got like laser focus on what we're caring about. But then if it's just more and more and more and we can never come back down to a regulated state, everything gets off, right? And ultimately we just give up entirely, right? And that's this sort of trauma response. It's that shutdown. And oftentimes what happens then is rather than being able to get back into a nice, calm, they sometimes call it rest and digest, or just like a nice state where we're feeling good, we're feeling open, we're feeling, calm and confident. We're in that collapse state. And the only way we can get out of it is when we're kicked back into the stress state. And so we can get into this cycle where we vacillate between exhaustion, just that deep bone exhaustion of shutdown of burnout until we get stressed enough and then we're back up and then back down into the collapse. Okay. And this is a physical response. And so the reason I'm spending as much time on this as I am is because I want us to understand once we start getting into what can we do about this, that we can't talk ourselves out of this. I mean, that can help for sure. And it's a nervous system response. So we have to deal with the physical, somatic body element of it. Okay. So that's kind of hopefully some groundwork that might be helpful. Any questions or comments before we continue? Okay. So the key question then is how do we come back, or how do we avoid it altogether in the first place? Even better, right? And as I already alluded to, a felt sense of safety in the body is going to be paramount because safety is going to be necessary for us to calm our nervous systems, right? We can't just convince ourselves everything is fine if our body is acting as if we're being chased by a tiger or we have 10,000 tennis balls being thrown at us, right? Or whatever it is. If we're in that state over and over and over, that then leads to this shutdown, we can't really simply talk ourselves out of it. And so, what I'd like to invite us to do, if you're willing, is play with a couple of little somatic practices. I have heard people refer to this as microdosing safety. So just little things that we can do throughout our day, or if we're feeling, activated, or to help kind of complete that stress cycle and bring us back. Okay. So if you're willing, I'm going to take us through a little exercise. I learned this from a webinar with David Treleaven. He borrowed it from Stacey Haynes and Spenta Kandawala, I think, um, who started a group called Generative Somatics. And so what I would invite us to do is start by just making a fist, tight fist with one of our hands. And imagine that the job of this closed fist is to take care of our safety and survival. Okay, and you can close your eyes if you want to. If you want to turn off your camera briefly, you can, whatever you feel comfortable doing. So this fist is in charge of our safety and survival. And now I want you to take your other hand and try to open the fist. Just try to pry it open. And as you're doing that, all I want you to do is notice. I want you to notice the experience. I want you to notice your breath. I want you to notice what's happening with your fist. Okay, just anything that's happening in your body or in your mind, just notice. My hand is starting to hurt. That's what I'm noticing. Okay, and then let's pause for a second. Is anybody willing to share what they noticed there when you were trying to pry your hand open? So interesting. Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to do round two. Same thing, make a fist again. Again, if you want to close your eyes, whatever you're comfortable with. And now I want you to focus first on your other hand, okay, the unfisted hand. This fist is still responsible for our safety and survival, okay, so same setup. And now this other hand, I want you to focus on it. I want you to bring care and compassion, curiosity, respect, okay, to this open hand. And then I invite you to take the open hand and just place it under your closed fist. And then imagine saying something to the fist like, good job. Like, of course you're closed. You're taking care of our safety. That's super smart. I have no agenda here. I'm just here. I'm just here with you. And again, notice what happens. Happens to your fist, your body, your breath, your mood. And then whenever you're ready, come back, and if you're willing to share what that was like. Beautiful, thank you. Anyone else want to share? Yeah, I think it's so amazing. I mean, the first time I did this exercise, it's just, I mean, it just is eye-opening, I think. Um, the physical shifts, right? I mean, like seriously, uh, perceptible, noticeable physical shifts simply from changing the way we're approaching our own body or our own experience, right? And and as you were saying, this idea of like kind of being at battle with ourselves, I think is a big part of this. And we're not going to get into it today, but some of you might be familiar with a form of therapy that's also been brought to lots of different coaching programs as well now, called IFS, Internal Family Systems. There are somatic work around what they might call somatic parts work. So um, internal family systems is about lots of parts that we have inside of us. So people can also and often do bring a somatic approach to that. And it's really interesting, like we can just dialogue with parts of our body. Um, and again, it's really about bringing that compassionate presence, um, and not trying to force our bodies to have a different experience than they're having, right? This idea that there's a reason we're tensed up, there's a reason all of these things are happening, and there's a reason that we're shut down. Because at the time when we had 10,000 tennis balls flying at us for month after month after month, the only thing our body could do was shut down. That was absolutely the smartest, wisest thing to do. And so, in order for us to come back from that kind of burnout, we need to acknowledge what went on in the body, give credit where credit is due, right? Like this was a great adaptation, and try to release that from the body if we don't need it anymore. Does that make sense? Kind of the basic idea. There are tons of these little, um, like microdosing safety somatic exercises that you can do. So a lot of them involve finding an anchor. Um, Oftentimes it's an internal anchor. So in sort of traditional mindfulness or other kinds of meditation, that tends to be the breath. For some people, that's a great anchor, and we know there's a lot around sort of the impact of our breathing on our physiology. So you can modify all kinds of things through different kinds of breathing, um, and and that can be super helpful. For some people, though, the breath is like, I mean, you just focusing on it makes you really try to change it, or it can be triggering, or all kinds of things. And so you can also find other anchors, like maybe it's the back of your hand or the inside of your arm, or something that just feels neutral or even pleasant. People can also anchor into a positive, like a happy place. So some of this is around resourcing ourselves, right? So sometimes if we're going into something difficult or we want to explore something difficult, whether that's within ourselves or in a situation, grounding ourselves into a place that just in our mind that just makes us feel just fantastic, right? And relaxed. And whether that's a beach or the mountains or hiking in the forest, oftentimes it is something like that, something outdoors in nature. It doesn't have to be. So lots of ways to get resourced in sort of an inner world. And then also back to this really outer physical sense. I mentioned at the beginning to some of you, my internet is out, so I'm not at home doing this, so I don't have my usual stuff. But if you take like a pillow, I'm taking a bag, and you might be in offices and not have a pillow either, but when you get home, you can try and just hold it across your abdomen. And you can play with holding it in different spots, like up higher on your chest or lower, and just explore what that feels like. For a lot of people, again, not everyone, that also is just a calming, like gives us a sense of safety, which then can help us get back into a regulated state. Okay, so just a couple of ideas there. Any questions or comments or anything to add before we continue into a little bit more of the like I would call, I mean, this is all tactical to some extent, but I feel like we're starting, like the safety piece is like ground zero, right? It is like the absolute base level. We need to establish that before we can do more. And then we're going to get more into, let's talk about burnout. Let's talk about what are the dimensions. Let's talk about what are the components and how can we address those. Anything before we move forward? Okay. Okay. So just to recap what I was just saying. So safety, foundational. Connected to that is this sense of awareness, which you all have already demonstrated, right? Around noticing what was happening in your body, what was happening in your thoughts, etc., as you were doing some of these somatic exercises. We know the awareness is important no matter, right? Even if you're not doing a somatic exercise, it's really helpful to just know what's going on in your body, what's going on in your mind, and what's going on in your emotions. And then we also want to try to establish some understanding. In this case, some understanding of what is burnout, right? What can we do with this? How can we move forward? How can we build resilience? And so that's where we're going next. So as I mentioned already, there are different dimensions of burnout. This is a conceptualization of burnout that is probably the most uh, widely known. Some of you may know it. Christina Maslach developed this I think it was first published as a scale in the early 80s, I think developed in the late 70s, so it's been around for a long time. Um, and and she points to three dimensions of burnout: exhaustion, cynicism, and professional efficacy. Let's talk a little bit about each of these. I will say, I mean, again, kudos to her. She's like the first person to do this, and it's fantastic. It's been around a long time. I don't love that the first two are like negatively framed and the last one is positive. It's like confusing to me, especially if you're talking about a scale. Like, why do you want these reversed? But here we are. Um, so exhaustion clearly contributes to burnout, and I think some of you have already spoken to this, right? It's like that just depleted, like just completely drained, this new level of exhaustion, right? That's one dimension of burnout. Cynicism, and here I should also say we're focusing mostly on professional burnout, knowing that we're one person, we're each one person, and all of our parts of our lives contribute to our feelings of burnout. And so you can extend what we're saying into other realms, but here we're focusing mostly on professional. So cynicism is just like, I don't, I mean, I don't want to say quiet quitting, but it's like a little bit of checking out or extremely negative, cynical attitude towards the job, right? It's just like not good. And then professional efficacy, and I think all of you have mentioned in one way or another each of these things as we've been talking about professional efficacy, right? This is just our performance. Like, how are we doing? What is our effectiveness at work? And we know that if we're burned out, we're not going to be as effective. Certainly not, right? So these are sort of the dimensions. She further breaks those down into root causes. And this is where I want us to take a little bit of time to explore together. So she has 6 root causes of burnout. Again, these are connected to professional burnout or in a professional context. The first is workload. So, how reasonable or unreasonable are the demands that are being placed on you, right? Whether that's the total volume of what you're working on, whether that's the timeline, the level of resources that you're being given to support your success in completing that work. Okay, so that's one cause. Another is around control. When we feel that we have very little autonomy, um, or just very little ability to influence the way we do our work, how we do it, what we're doing, etc., we feel sort of powerless. That also contributes, not surprisingly, to a sense of burnout. If our values are misaligned with the values of our organization, and I will say, just from my own experience, this is a tough one in academia because um, even if we're aligned with what sort of claim to be the fundamental values of an academic setting around discovery and creativity and learning and all of that, I think oftentimes the lived values, at least in my experience, feel very different from that, and that can be tough. Community. So community is around um, not just do you have social support, but workplace culture, kind of speaking to what I was addressing a minute ago, right? Like support for one another, or on the negative extreme, is there bullying, right? Is there harassment? So what is that workplace culture like? Then another cause is reward. So reward is I think fairly self-explanatory, but just remembering that there are lots of ways, lots of forms of reward that we can get for our work, right? So it might be financial. So it might be, do we feel that we're being paid fairly? It might be recognition, right? Whether that's an award or praise or publications or invitations to conferences or, right, whatever, opportunities. So do we feel that we're being sufficiently rewarded by the work? And then our sense of fairness as it connects to our workplace. So does it feel like a fair environment? Are there inequities, discrimination, right? That can contribute to burnout. So Before I invite you to do something quickly, let me pause. Does anyone have any comments to share, anything to add, or anything connected to what we've said so far before I invite you to do a little experiment or kind of pondering a bit? It's not really an experiment, but so let's consider these six causes, these six contributors. And I invite you to just take a few minutes to kind of consider your level of satisfaction in each of these six areas. And then maybe to identify one or at most two that feel kind of least satisfying, or, said differently, maybe most problematic for you, because I'd then like to invite us to kind of work with the one that you've identified for the remainder of our time. So I'm going to be quiet for a minute. And again, just invite you to kind of assess your satisfaction with each of these six things, and then identify one you'd like to improve, maybe biggest bang for the buck. Does everyone have one that they've kind of zeroed in on? Anybody need a little more time to ponder? Just give me a wave or something if you'd like a little more time. Okay, I think we're okay moving ahead unless I missed somebody. Okay, so is anybody willing to share what area they're wanting to focus on? No pressure if you're not comfortable, but I'm curious. Yeah, it's super interesting, and I think this is a big, I mean, it's it's particularly interesting because of course control is one of the lack of control, right, is one of the root causes. And so feeling like we don't have the ability to influence or change some of these things, I think is really uh speaks volumes. And I also agree that in many cases there are a lot of these things are outside our control. What we're going to do on the next slide, and as we move forward, is focus on those things that we can control, recognizing that that is not in any way a substitute, right? Like both need to happen. We need to take greater ownership, I think, of our own well-being, build our own resilience, as some of you are sort of saying, right? Like be more intentional about decisions where we can be. And in parallel, um, organizations need to change, right? There's I think, a fair amount of evidence that suggests that burnout is very much an organizational issue, right? An institutional issue. And so I think it is really important to acknowledge that, right? The sort of it's not you, it's the job is there's a lot of truth in that, right? And as long as we're going to continue to operate in that environment, we need to navigate it as best we can, right? And we can try to change it at the same time. Um, But I think there's still like opportunity to sort of focus on where can we just move the needle a little bit. And I would argue, I mean, I'd have to go through and think really carefully about each one, but I suspect that we could find things, they might not be super satisfying, but that we could find ways to move the needle in each of these categories on our own. Maybe not by a lot, but sometimes just a little shift can make a big difference. All right, excellent. So now, and as I said, sort of full disclosure, um, what we're going to look at here, in terms of some tools that we can use to kind of help ourselves revive, right? And this can be either we sense that, we talked at the top of sort of overwhelm and how that can kind of crash into burnout. Maybe we're in that overwhelm sense. We don't want to go into full burnout. We want to slow that process. Or maybe we're feeling pretty good and we want to continue to build our resilience. Or maybe we're already in full burnout, right? And we really need to revive ourselves. But these are all things that we can do. It's a small number of things. I've just thrown out some examples. You all might have more to share today or that you'll just think of or come across in the future. And just again, to reiterate, these are not substitutes for the institutional change that I think is very needed and warranted. Okay, these are things that we can do, whatever our current environment, to move the needle a little bit. So we've talked in past workshops, and I don't remember exactly which one, but we've talked about this idea that self-care, that real self-care, is about being self-aware. And not only being self aware, but then acting from that place. So recognizing what we need and prioritizing that, right? Making time for it, even when we don't think we have time, right? Um, and even just pausing, like we did early on, right? Even just pausing to notice what's going on. How am I feeling? Like, what? Oh man, like this, there's something in my neck, or I'm actually really tired. I feel a migraine coming, right? Like, whatever. Because so often it's just that autopilot. So self-care can help us no matter where we are on that spectrum, right? Of fully energized, maybe all the way down to like full-blown burnout, really caring for ourselves. Um, Boundaries and priorities. Again, some of these are things we've talked about in others, things we talked about in the past, right? So, um, what's really uh, what's really necessary? We talked in our very first workshop, this round of the confab, right? About like, what if you only had one thing? Like, what if you just focused on one thing? How would that feel? And I think it reveals how difficult it is to establish and honor true priorities. I don't know if this is true, but I will tell you, when the coach that I was working with when I was in a couple of, like a senior associate dean, told me that initially, and maybe one of you can confirm or deny this, the word priority only came in the singular form because the idea is it's the one most important thing. And then we adapted it because no, we can't just have one priority. We have to have all kinds of priorities. So now we have the plural version, but really it's about the one fundamental primary thing. So that can be helpful. We know saying no can help. Checking our calendars for alignment with our priorities, right? If you look at your calendar, do you have meetings all day that are things you don't even care about? That's not great, right? That can lead to burnout. Um, Connecting with our sense of purpose and what matters most to us and how we can live that out in a professional setting. So I think this is especially important if there is a bit of a values mismatch with us and our workplace. Like, where can we tap into the part of our job that really feels important to us, where we really feel like it connects to our sense of purpose or mission, right? As people, and concentrating on that. Social support, critically important. Feeling isolated is I mean, there's just so much evidence on that, so much evidence on the power of social support and connecting with others, getting out of that sense of isolation, and then setting small goals and celebrating. And that's what we're going to do next. And celebration doesn't mean when you reach the goal. Maybe you don't reach even that small goal. You can still celebrate the progress, right? And savor that. Okay. So, and there are many others. Some of them I have included in the document that I think has sent out to all of you earlier this week, the Resourced and Ready Ultimate R&R, which goes through 10 different keys to really being resilient and establishing and maintaining well-being. And then you all probably have a million other ideas too, which we sadly don't have time to go through at the moment. However, you might share one as we go to the final slide, which is just next steps. And this is where we're going to set a tiny goal, a tiny baby step to try to make just a little improvement in the area that you selected, the one of those 6 areas, right? So whether it was workload or reward or control, whatever it is. And I'd invite each of you to identify one small thing that is in your control that you can do to try to improve your status, your well-being, your satisfaction in your chosen area, just by a little bit. It doesn't have to be huge. And I'll pause for a minute to let you ponder. All right, everybody have a next step that they're at least, I don't know if I'll push you all the way to full commitment, but let's say like, I might have to tell you all, I might have said this to you before, but I don't know if you've heard people say like a 99% commitment is the same as a 0% commitment. Like if it's truly a commitment, I really like, I go, no, no, no. So I will let you all get away with like a 95% commitment. It is fine with me. Does everyone have something that feels like they're relatively comfortable committing to? And I'll say, if not, make it smaller, make it easier. Just pick the easiest thing you can think of. All right. Thanks so much. Thanks so much for being here. Thanks for participating. Take care.